All right, everyone. Welcome in UGA Football Live with JC Shelton. That is former Georgia tight end Arthur Lynch. Artie, it's good to have you back on, man. Instant reactions was kind of gloomy. I'm not going to lie with you. Saturday. Arthur, I think my problem is before I jump on instant reactions, I'm trying to get the temperature of the fan base on social media, which turns out that all the negative Nellies are on social media, if you didn't know that already. So I think it pushes me into a gloomy situation before I get on these because after the watching the tape of Mississippi State, Georgia, I feel much better about what this team put out on the field. But we'll get into that. Artie, how are you doing, man? And did you get a chance to watch the Bulldogs versus the Bulldogs in Sanford?
Yeah, yeah. I was back and forth watching it, and to be honest, I mean, I kind of expected that a little bit because I think the way that Mississippi State has been playing, I mean, they just honestly haven't had. They've been kind of rocked as a program since Leach passed away. Totally understand that, but I mean, if you're, I think they got very lucky to have, you know, in the past 20 years, a Coach Mullen and then a Leach at a program like that. I know we like to give a lot of Coach Mullen as the butt of a lot of jokes, but if I think Florida fans are singing a different tune after the past couple of years with Napier to what they had with Mullen. Not a great recruiter, but a great football coach. I think those two things can be separately evaluated, but we're talking strictly about Mississippi State. That being said, my good friend who I've brought up on this pod before, Christian Robinson, who is now a linebacker coach at Alabama, he says no matter how good or how bad Mississippi State is, they are always going to have NFL talent because the state of Mississippi just produces it. Yeah. And so I'm always concerned when you play a team like Mississippi State or Ole Miss because it could just get sticky. So I wasn't surprised by how inconsistent the game looked from a Bulldog perspective, if that makes sense.
I think it does. And that's kind of what I was alluding to already was, instant reactions. I'm just like all the folks who join in, right? I just watch it how it plays and we jump on, we talk about it, right? So I got a chance after the game to watch it again and kind of dive into it deeper. And I came away with it with one area I want to talk about, which is third quarter. Georgia's up 34-10. Okay. That Georgia's completely dominating, right? You take away those two deep passes that Mississippi State was able to get. Great play calls, well executed by Van Buren, who played really nicely. I think his second stinking start. I mean, that was pretty impressive. Great play call by Jeff Lebby. It gets Georgia's secondary looking into the backfield, and then boom, eye discipline. I mean, you're beat, right? You take away those two, Georgia's up 34-3, but that 34-10 lead in the third quarter evaporated so quickly that it kind of turned the tides of the game. And then you have the national media just looking at the scoreboard, maybe looking at the stats here and there and be like, well, Georgia played around with the Bulldogs a little too much. I mean, I think it's just those – here's the mistakes, right? You had a 34-10 lead, Georgia. You had Mississippi State driving. Two personal fouls on Georgia extended the drives, both on third downs, freebies, right? They go on to set up for a touchdown there and a touchdown run. And then Carson Beck marches down the field again. And mind you, Georgia punted one time this game. One time. Carson Beck marched down the field again, interception at the goal line, a ball that he would tell you he completely forced. He had, I think that what got him there is he had all day to throw. All day to throw. He's been diming this Mississippi State defense all day. I think he almost trusted himself a little bit too much there almost. Those one to loss unlucky, and it's just a complete forced ball. The defender had great leverage and picks it off. After that, MSU scores again. Right, so all of a sudden it is, it's 34-24, and Georgia's like, wait, come on, we've played so well this game, especially offensively, and the defense at that point was just kind of getting taken advantage of a little bit as far as eye discipline goes. They didn't run the ball particularly well, right? Jeff Lebby, we talked about him as a coordinator. Look what Oklahoma's offense has done since he left. They're abysmal, like really, really bad. And, we kind of expected, hey, Levy's going to show Georgia some stuff. And I said this last week that they're going to have to be disciplined into as far as eye discipline and such. In the secondary, that's where it bit them. right? You had Julian Humphrey played on that touchdown pass, which was a really good pass and catch by Van Buren. The kid's going to be a stud. He was tracking well with that receiver. It was a great play with the receiver. You had Jonel Aguero get beat by like a 40-yarder. That was really well played by him, but another great throw and great catch. You can give up those. The things that Georgia wants to have back, and Kirby Smart talked about, Dalen Everett talked about those guys, was just complete lack of eye discipline, looking in the backfield and get beat over top where you're completely beat. You weren't even in stride with the receiver. Those are things that Georgia wants back and they can work on. But they kind of stood out at the end of that game because Georgia was, they were comfortable lead, really tore up the stat sheet, especially on offense. And it just didn't kind of turn out the way Georgia wanted at the end. But there was no debate. I mean, Georgia was going to win that game, right? And it was just that third quarter and that string of events I was talking about that really kind of painted in a different light. But going back and looking at it, I think there's a lot of positives that come out of this already. We get on some offense stuff here. We'll start it out that way. 605 yards, best of the season. Like I said, Georgia punted one stinking time, missed a field goal, a long one by Peyton Rittering there at the end of the first. 5-11 on third down. All right, so we talked about kind of the issues on third down early in the season. Georgia's been much better the last two games. That's a big positive. 4 or 5 in the red zone. We had that pick, of course. Carson Beck, career day, 459, 36 of 48, 3 touchdowns, had the 2 picks. One was off a deflection. Arian Smith had a career day. Now, the thing about Arian, and we talk about already got to have it guys, right? And Arian Smith is the most targeted guy on this team right now. He leads the team in receptions and yards, 5 for 134, touchdown. But of course, he did have a drop in there as well. I think the biggest question for me is, if he can fix those drops, he's going to be a really, really, really good piece of this Georgia offense the rest of the year. We're relying on him a lot, right? Without Colby Young, without Rod Thomas. Those guys aren't available, not with the program. So we were talking about it. Who's going to be those guys that step up? And I think Arian Smith is one of them. From your perspective as a former receiver, drops. Is it kind of a yip situation? We know he's working on those, right? He has to be. What do you think that goes into that?
Man, it's so funny you bring this up because I was thinking about. I had this conversation all week, right? I've been doing job interviews and doing you meet with these people every day, and there's a point to the story, I promise, right? And had an interview. It didn't go great, right? And it was started the interview like doing really well, and then I missed a question, like about 5 minutes in, and it was a question I knew the answer to, right? And then I let that missed question affect me for the rest of the interview, right? So what turned into like, hey, I was doing really well. And then when I got out, the way we're kind of set up here at school, you kind of meet with your mentor who's a second year. He kind of helps you along as you're trying to he's like, what do you think happened? And I looked at him square in the face. And I said, in football, right, the number one rule as like a pass catcher, but was like, don't let one drop pass affect your entire game, dictate this entire interview. And in football, you have to have a short memory, right? If you drop a ball, if you miss a tackle, if you fumble the football, whatever it is, right? You can't let that affect your whole game. And as someone who had some pretty big drops, in my career, and I think I had a lot of big catches as well. I certainly have more catches than drops. But that's all mental, right? Everyone's like, oh, we can't catch, or the yips, or no. It's not a talent thing. It's not a capability thing. It's just simply he's in his own head, right? Now, if you're breaking down each individual drop, sometimes if you're running across the field and you feel like you have momentum, like, hey, I got to catch it, turn upfield, his eyes are going to be upfield as the ball's coming in. So his body and momentum are leaning forward when the ball is still behind. That is a 99% time, or 99% of the time, that's going to be a drop, right? Or he's jump ball and he takes his eyes off the last second because he's trying to land differently. Typically going to be a drop, get broken up. So I'm always very keenly aware that drops are typically never a hand-eye coordination thing, and it's a concentration thing, right? What I will say before I send it back to you is, you mentioned the fans. You mentioned the reaction. You know, a couple weeks ago, people wanted to burn Mike Bobo's house down, fire Kirby Smart, right? They wanted to, I think, fire Carson Beck, key his Lamborghini, pop his tires, you name it, they wanted to do it, right? And what I was saying is be patient, right? Let these guys, these playmakers, gain confidence to where they are now in a position where they're going to make plays because they're not afraid to make mistakes, right? And I think we're about to see here is the second half of that Alabama. I think they kind of realized that they were no longer invincible, right? And they stopped caring about being perfect or this allure of like, let's not lose or whatever, and let's just cut it loose. And Bobo used to say it all the time. He's like, man, just cut it loose, right? Like, don't be afraid to make a mistake. Just go out and play. And I do think we have seen since the start of the second half of that Alabama game, we have seen an offense that is not necessarily more explosive because the explosiveness has always been there, but more of like, hey, let's just go out and play football and let our guys make plays. And that's a lot of passing yards, 459. That's a lot of passing yards, right? Against an SEC opponent, right? I don't care what kind of opponent it was. So I do think our offense is turning a corner here, and a corner that we have been trying to turn for a while. Now we just got to put it all together, right? No missed field goals. Defense needs to hold up their end of the bargain, especially if the offense is holding up their end of the bargain. So I think there's more positive takeaways than negative ones, particularly from like where the team needs to go, not where they are now, but where they're going and where they need to go. And I think this weekend is an awesome opportunity for us to put it all together. So that's my spiel.
I agree that there's more positive for sure. And I like what you're saying about the offense. I think that's clear watching the tape and watching Carson Beck and how he's operating, because even in that early interception that allowed Mississippi State a free field goal, right? They went up first. He didn't change. His moxie didn't change. I think he's shown that the last 2 years. We don't have to worry about as much as him. And when you talk about Arian Smith, he kind of did the same thing. He got that early drop out of the way, and he went on to have a great day. Even got banged up on a ball that he laid out for, which Carson threw an absolute dime. I think NFL scouts were drooling at the mouth at that one. He let that ball go off his not even off his back foot, and it didn't even plant, and he's throwing it 60 yards. But yeah, offensively, no, the explosive's there, and I think they are taking more chances. I love the play design by Bobo. Looking back as well, you had an end around to Anthony Evans, who looks great with the ball in his hands. Artie, I mean, that's a weapon that you have there as a return specialist. You know that Georgia believes in his quickness and his ability with the ball in his hands. But as a receiver, he's getting his chances with the decimation there at the receiver group. And he showed some really good things. He had 4 catches, 42. He had that rush for 50 yards off the end around. Bobo and Carson Beck on another deep ball. I think that was the deep ball to Arian Smith that I'm talking about, where he had a prime Aaron Murray ball fake, right? And it sets it up perfectly. Great play action. I really love seeing that. That's what I feel like Bobo has gotten so good at over his career, is the play action and setting those up looks wise, but also having a quarterback that does it well, and he teaches that well. Yeah, it was surprising to me because already when I was talking to instant reactions, I was like, I was kind of expecting Georgia really establish the run game here, right? Against the Mississippi State defense that was allowing the most yards per rush in the SEC, in a game to where you want an inferior opponent to go away early, right? To get young guys in, get them some confidence, and maybe give your starters some breaks going into a game like Texas. That's not what they elected to do. Georgia did have success. They averaged 5 yards per carry at Mississippi State, but they passed it, 48 times. So am I crazy? But this is my takeaway is they know Texas is probably going to be a shootout, or maybe even down the line past Texas against Ole Miss and teams like that. It's going to be more of a shootout. So we need to get this pass game rocking. I'm talking about confidence everywhere with Carson, not only in Carson, but also the receivers, the running backs, some pass pro. You need Nate Frazier, the true freshman, to get some experience there as a pass pro because he's a great back, right? You want him on the field as much as you can. So that's what I kind of came away with, because there was places to run there. And they showed it throughout the game, but they elected not to and kind of keep it in the air. That's what I'm thinking. I might be crazy there already.
No. Hey, look, I think you're right. I also think there's a component of we need to put a lot of different game film out there of our offense now that it's kind of got some confidence, and that we can make other teams prepare for a more dynamic offense, because I do think Bobo, in his heart of hearts, he loves to throw the ball, but he also loves to like impose his will from an offensive standpoint, right? Run the ball, be physical, right? Because he loves the play action stuff. And in order for the play action stuff to work, you really want to get downhill in that kind of running from a running style perspective. So I just think with the film that we're putting together right now from Carson Beck, and he's throwing it all over the yard, that's going to make defenses soften up a little bit. We obviously have some suspensions. We don't know when they're coming back. A little worried about Robinson's knee. But I do think that from what we're putting on tape, it is going to make opposing defenses, have to plan it, have to plan a little bit differently, right? Because I think at the beginning of the year, it was a little bit easier to prepare for the Bulldogs. Not Carson Beck's fault, but just from a lack of a vertical threat and a lack of a threat from softening up the middle of the field.
That's a good point, Art. I like that, because what Georgia has shown since the second half of that Alabama game is, oh man, we have to respect this team over the top. We have to respect Arian Smith, Dominic Lovett, Dylan Bell. Those guys have gotten so much deeper in their route combinations, and Carson Beck's hitting him. Carson Beck's a deep ball. I mean, listen, it was there last year, here and there, right? But man, it looks improved. I mean, going back and watching that game again, and then watching even Auburn and Alabama, especially in the second half. I mean, his deep ball, he's giving these guys chances. We call it 50-50 ball, but it might be more like 60-40 for where he's putting these things, in my opinion. And that's not all of them, of course, folks. That's not all of them, but that's the majority of them from what I'm seeing. I think these guys have the opportunity. Can they make it? That's going to be the big question that we'll never have answers to until they line it up. But defensively, and we'll move on to Texas after this, folks. Defensively for Georgia, we talked about, really that string of mistakes as far as personal fouls, getting beat over the top. We've talked about that already. That's the bad looks, right? But from a numbers standpoint, and it kind of gives us a picture here, Georgia had 0 sacks, 0 QB pressures, 3 tackles for loss, only 2 pass breakups. And both of those pass breakups were by defensive linemen. That was really odd. I mean, it's bad looks. I don't know, right? Because, look, Van Buren was getting the ball out of his hands very, very quickly. And I think Lebby schemed really well to give these guys looks, give them open looks. Yeah, it might be 40 yards down the field, but it might be dink and dunks as well. Georgia, for the best case scenario against Texas, though, and this is really interesting, is the sacks and the pressures and stuff might not matter, Artie. And I'm going to get into this in a minute because it's a really crazy stat for me. But good things wise for Georgia defense before we move on. KJ Bolden got his first interception as a Dog, playing center fielder out there. He catches one on the sideline. That was great. He's going to have plenty of more. Georgia allowed just 3 yards per carry on the day. Really good for that run defense. And let's say Micah Williams has only gotten like 20 snaps total the last couple games. So he's still nursing that ankle. Can he go more against Texas? And then Mississippi State went 3 of 12 on third down, 3 and 3 on fourth, which, and that kept a couple of their drives alive during that game, which makes it, that's what kind of adds to the Georgia struggled against Mississippi State to the national perspective, but it's not it. And here's the thing I was telling you about, Artie. And Georgia's a 3.5 point underdog in this game, which is, what does that tell us? That means if this game is in Athens, it's a pick 'em. In Austin, 3.5 point dog. The thing I want to tell you about Texas and Quinn Ewers here and how it results to, or at least gives us a picture to Georgia's defensive pressure and the lack of, right? People say, well, you need to get QB hurries, you need to get sacks, you need to get pressures on really, really good quarterbacks, and whether it be anybody in college football history, NFL too, Patrick Mahomes, Tom Brady, all those guys. For Quinn Ewers, though, it doesn't look like that matters because here's what the numbers tell us. He's a better QB when pressured. When he has a clean pocket, 71.9 passing grade, 5.3 yards average depth, 2.14 second average time to throw. When pressured, 78 grade compared to 71, 10.1 yards compared to 5.3, 3.39 seconds to throw compared to 2.14. What does that tell you? That means he's really good on the run, and then he's very, very good at reading where that blitz is coming from and exposing that area. So it's not as just simple as, oh, we need Georgia's defensive line to be really, really good at getting pressure on Saturday. I don't think that shouldn't be a key to the game, in my opinion, just based on that. You have to contain Ewers while also playing great defense in the back end. Artie, this to me is going to be a shootout. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think. Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry. No, I want to talk a little bit about Quinn Ewers because I think he. I know we're going to talk about Heisman race at the end of the show, and had he not gotten hurt, he probably is a guy that would be a front runner, right? But because it's a longer season, who knows? I don't know how that's going to work. But the thing I respect about Quinn Ewers is, he kind of came online when NIL just started. He was one of the first players to have a high school NIL deal. Went to Ohio State for 4 weeks, then transferred to Texas. I think there was a certain level of immaturity with him, and I think he's talked about this. And he played as a true freshman, if I remember correctly. Okay, not great. They brought in Arch Manning, and I think he got advice from Sark and other people and did a lot of self-reflection and introspection, right? As a 19 to 20-year-old, which is incredibly tough to do. And I think he generally wanted to get better. Remember, he had the mullet. He cut the mullet, and he kind of came back and was just was very, not. He was just very systematic with his approach, and you obviously show the numbers. I think typically when you have a rocky freshman year and you're a 5-star like that, and they bring in a guy as famous and as well known and as touted as Arch Manning, it would have been very easy to kind of I'm just gonna get out of here, right? This is too dicey. But the fact that he stuck it out and has gotten better each year, and obviously has a ton of natural talent, to me that says loads about who he is as a person and a competitor, right? And that's why I think out of all the players all the guys we're going to play this year, he's someone that I'm not super worried about from he can make a play, like a Jalen Milroe, but just you could tell his team's going to rally with him, right? And I think Texas is a very good football program at this point, but I think it's going to be what we're going to see on Saturday is a showdown between two quarterbacks who are going to be in the NFL for a long time, right? Are they going to be the Matthew Staffords, play 15 years in a Super Bowl and MVP? I don't know, but I think you're looking at two players that are going to play for a decade plus in the NFL. And I think that's going to be the coolest matchup that we're going to see this weekend, in my opinion.
I do. I love the quarterback perspective because of that reason. These guys are going to play for a long time. Also, they're very similar. They're not guys who are going to, they're not going to run past you. They can get a first down here and there with their feet, sure. They're not going to run past you. They're not also going to tuck the ball as soon as they get out of the pocket. You know what I mean? That's not their go-to. They're looking down the field. And that's where Ewers has been so good this year. And then last year, too. I mean, he led them to a stinking playoff, right? Beck, also really good in that area. Getting outside the pocket more this year, he's been really good. And interception-wise, these guys aren't perfect. They push the ball down the field. Sometimes that happens. It's not exactly a killer. I mean, Ewers threw an interception early against Oklahoma last week. That game ended up 34-3, right? He came back from that, had a good day, threw a touchdown. Beck had 2 last week, threw for 3 and 4, 59. They show a lot of moxie in that area of making mistakes, but also coming back, and they're not going to, tuck their tails. So you can have a really good defensive day all the way to you don't. You know what I mean? All of a sudden, it just kind of folds defensively, and those guys are going to make plays. So you can't underestimate them. I know Texas thinks that as well as Georgia. Offensive line is really the big thing for me in Texas as well as defensive, but offensive for me already because we talked about it a couple of weeks ago when Arch Manning when Arch Manning took over. Right, you had a backup, you have a redshirt freshman in there. You lose the guy who's led you for 2 seasons at that point. If there was any area for that offensive line to kind of show some, I don't know, non-cohesiveness, whatever you want to say, they didn't. They stepped up. Arch Manning played really, really well. I think that talks a lot about their offensive line. Also, last week against Oklahoma, they rushed for 177 yards on a stout Oklahoma defense. Who that was kind of the thing that they had to stop the run against Texas to make it a game because that offense, right? That offense for Oklahoma, we knew the issues going into it. But Texas ran the ball at will, which is something they haven't done a lot this season. But when they do it well. So they're very, very balanced. We all know about Sarkisian as far as a play schemer. He's along the lines of a Lane Kiffin, right? Probably head to head as far as offensive coordinators go in this game. So it's going to be an absolute chess match by these coordinators and, of course, Kirby Smart and the assistant guys that Georgia has on staff. But also beyond that, it's just line of scrimmage play. This is going to be a really, really big battle. Texas has good guys on both fronts. On the defensive front, you got Texas, Anthony Hill Jr. He's an absolute dog. He's going to play in the league for a long time. 42 stops, leads the team, 4.5 sacks, 2 on the year. As far as efficiency goes, Texas is the best team in the SEC by far. Best by far. And add all your efficiency metrics in, and they're best to this point, right? But I think it is interesting enough to talk about the opponents already because, they have played in Michigan and Oklahoma, some cupcakes around there as well. Mississippi State. It's so hard to kind of preview this because this is by far the biggest Texas matchup we've seen as far as a good opponent with equal enough talent on both sides of the ball. So they're going to be tested at will as well. Georgia, they're battle tested. They are. Now, is Texas a better team than Alabama? Yeah, I think so. I think we've seen that, especially Alabama going to the wire with South Carolina. Should have lost that game at the end. Absolutely. But I think as a Georgia fan, you want to say, are we battle tested? Are we going to be up to the challenge? I think you are, absolutely. Beyond just having Kirby Smart your leader, these guys have been through it. They have a lot of senior captains on both sides. Defense have done some good things here, especially the last 2 weeks. Offense, we already talked about explosiveness. Carson Beck's throwing the ball around. Mike Bobo, I think, is getting more comfortable with the players he has on this roster this year, right? It's all about this season and not what you had last season, what have you, and using the same things. You got to adapt to your players. I think this is a good spot for Georgia right now. I think you're the underdog, technically, right? I think Georgia's going to feed off that. I think the biggest question for me is who has the big advantage as far as schematics go, right? Because you look at that Georgia-Alabama game, the first half, Georgia was out-coached at times, it looked, right? Because the edge was getting exposed and such. I think that's going to be the biggest chess match for me, and then the players just have to go make the plays.
Yeah, look, I think we're number 5 in the country. I think we're 5 or 6-1. We're a play away from being undefeated, beating a very good team in Alabama. And let's be honest, Alabama should be undefeated as well. They laid an egg against Vanderbilt. They got their own issues. What I think Georgia is having a difficult time with right now is not only finding their identity, but dealing with distractions off the field that they can control, no doubt, but the distractions nonetheless. And that's very difficult to do, right? And I think the one reason why I think, I like this matchup at quarterback is because I think you have 2 guys that understand the magnitude of the position that they're both in, right? Starting quarterbacks at Blue Bloods, and I think we are lucky to have a guy like Beck who is he's like this, you know what I mean? And that will bode well in a game when you're down by 28 in Tuscaloosa, or you're in a nail biter for 4 quarters against Texas. But I think when you're talking about were we out coached, I don't know necessarily if it's that the coaches dropped their game. I just think the amount of distractions that they got to deal with, that it's not like an every week thing, but it seems like every 2 or 3 weeks. And trust me when I say this, those things linger on a football team because, like, again, like when you see something in the news like that, it's like that's your teammate. You care about them. You're concerned about the situation, and the coaches are trying to figure out like beyond the football stuff and like the human stuff. And then once they kind of figure that out, then they got to get back to the drawing board. Like, okay, well, we do have a game to play. We got to figure out how to put the best team on the field to win a football game, right? That is not an easy thing to do. And to me, I think that's where we're seeing some inconsistency on the field as well. It's just like trying to put out fires outside of football. That makes sense.
Yeah, that's a good point. I haven't thought about it that way. That could lead to it as well because you have games where you play a great quarter, you play great 2 quarters, but the full game, like you look at that third quarter against Mississippi State, that's kind of the one quarter where you didn't. So it was another game where you didn't at least play your best the full game. If Georgia does it though, I mean they're going to have every opportunity to win this game this week in my mind. It's gonna be at the wire. Now I don't think you beat Texas by 20, folks. I don't think that's going to happen. But you put your best team on the field and you have a complete game, you're going to be right there in the fourth quarter. And people, I mean, there's a lot of different opinions on this game. I feel like national wise, as far as how close it'll be, but I'm not seeing anybody take Georgia. And that should be plenty of fuel for the Dogs. If they're reading anything, right? Because they do. Kids see these things these days. It's everywhere. I think Kirby Smart, these guys are going to take advantage of it.
Yeah, I don't disagree. I also think that just, just from a fan perspective, right? A couple years ago, and it was Stetson's first last year, and they went undefeated, and they kind of just ran amok for the whole season, right? It's like that is such a rarity in college football and college sports, right? Where you just like start to finish, it's a dot. Like what we're seeing this year is like this is what college football is, right? Like it's not meant to be just this like you're winning every game by 40. And it's very hard to do that. It just is, no matter how much talent you have, right? You said a stat last week where I think like out of Alabama's like 7 or out of Nick Saban's 7 national championships, he was only undefeated like what, once, maybe twice. It's like and I think the more and more we see college football change, the more parity we're going to get because it's no longer about who has the best facilities, but who could put the most money in a guy's pocket.
Already, we're seeing that right now, dude. It's crazy. It's the first season of conference expansion. It's the first season of the SEC being the setup the way it is, where the top 2 teams play. Right, first season of the playoff. NIL has really taken a jump because teams are used to this now. Companies have been established for a couple of years now, are just helping these guys make money. Yeah. Right, so this is the biggest year for all of this, and it happens to coincide with the most parity we've ever seen. No, those 2 things go together. Right?
No, they do. And so it's going to be more and more difficult to have like a super team. It just is, right? It's like, which honestly, if you're a fan of college football and you have no allegiance to a team, it's like you almost would appreciate that because it's going to make more competitive football. But it's going to be very, very, very difficult to like go unscathed week 1 and then make it to a 12-team playoff and then have to play 4 additional games to win the whole thing, right? So I think fans need to like temper their expectations, but also realize like, this is a long season. I think we've played 6 games. I think if they play every maximum game that they can, they're going to play 15. It's like we're a third away into the season. We're not even halfway there yet, So I think that's one thing that we need to keep into perspective as well.
That's a good point. Let's get into Heisman ratings. Injury update. Sorry. Branson Robinson. I almost missed this already. Branson Robinson, MCL. Now, as a guy who just came off a torn patella tendon last season, it was scary, and I know Georgia fans were really worried about what happened with Branson. Now, he came out and missed the rest of the game, but Kirby Smart, and I think this is good news from this perspective, Kirby Smart said that it is an MCL and he's going to be out. He said 2 to 3 weeks. Could be, could not be how Georgia is. They're going to give him as much time as he needs to get back. But it's not anything serious. So that's really good news for Georgia. Now, he's not going to be playing this weekend, which gives you Trevor Etienne, a true freshman, and Nate Frazier, and Cash Jones, former walk-on, to really head up that running back room. I'm confident in those guys, right? They're going to play some more snaps, sure, but I am confident in those guys, at least that Georgia has in the backfield moving forward. We'll wait for our next show, right? End of this week, we'll have another one, and we'll talk about the actual updates that came from the SEC. Those will be available for us then. So we'll get into some more if there's anything else. I know Smael Mondon missed another game. Hopefully he gets back in that Georgia linebacker room. Heisman rankings. UGA Football Live's Heisman rankings, right? First time we've talked about this already. I think it's a good point in the season. We're at the midway point. Why not? Let's talk about it. I don't know how we should do this. I think we might have the same number one. So I think we just talk through the number one. All right, I'll let you go announce it to the folks watching on Facebook, YouTube, at this Pulse Sports Network, or Twitter.
So you want me to go first?
Yeah. Give me your number one.
I think we all know the number one is our guy from Boise State. I want to make sure I'm pronouncing his name right. Ashton Jeanty. Dude's a stud. Like, he looks like a running back. He's built like a running back. He's got agility. He's got balance. He's got explosiveness. It seems absurd to look at his stat line each week. I think he's clipped 200 yards like 3 times already this year, maybe 4. So I think he's a clear-cut number one. I think it would be freaking awesome if Boise State took home a Heisman winner and would go over to the Pac-12 in the same year as the Pac-12 just like disbanded and whatever. I think that would be a cool little storyline. But that's my number one guy, and I'll let you go share yours. I'm sure it's very similar. But then we can go dive into 2 and 3.
Yeah, I thought you would too, and I like that already because I also have Ashton Jeanty as my number one right now. Here's the thing. I think the other side of this opinion, which I've seen been said, is the level of competition he's playing right in the Mountain West. If you're saying by that metric is why you don't have him number one, you're saying that we should see players in that conference hit around his numbers on a yearly basis or more often than we have. What he's doing has never been happened, has never been done. I mean, through 6 games, he's on pace to break Barry Sanders' record. He has twice the stats that Derrick Henry and Mark Ingram had the last 2 Heisman running back winners. Now, obviously, they're playing in the SEC, right? But to have double that amount and be the only guy to have done that, no matter what conference you're in, that's your number one in my mind. I mean, and you talk about it, he is that offense, dude. Absolutely. And they're having a great season because of him. I know it's an 11-man game, but when you have a guy doing that, that's a different animal. That's crazy to me. That's why I have my number one, and I like that you have him as well, Artie. You're a good man. Number 2 for me, and I might catch some flack for this, I still think it's Travis Hunter. I know he missed a game and a half, right? And that's the injury thing we talk about it, but I think it's important to say, and you already said this a second ago when we were talking about the CFP, is it is a very, very long season. So I think we might be a day and age where you can miss a game or 2 and still, while you're on the field, we'll judge you from that. I think to me, it's more about his impact for that Colorado team as being like the other day against when last time he played, ESPN put up a stat that says, impact players. And it was Travis Hunter on offense and Travis Hunter on defense. And, they're 4. They're 4-2. They lost to Kansas State by 3 without Hunter on the field. Game could have been different. They're still 4-2. We talk about the losses for teams. Boise State's probably not going to have a lot of losses. Colorado very well could be in Big 12 title contention at the end of the season. They're in contention right now, right? They still could be there. They've improved throughout the season. So I still like Travis Hunter. I think the only thing that people are saying is, well, the injury, right? And I think that's where the mix-up is.
Yeah, look, I like him too. He's not my number 2. He's actually my number 3. I think my number 2 is good old Cam Ward from Miami. And it's Cam, right? Yeah, I'm just making sure. Yeah, Cam Ward. And the reason why I just think that like he's going to have a few showdowns here coming at the end of the season. I don't know if he's going to have enough like hype around him. I think that's the one thing about Travis Hunter, where like even if he misses a couple games, but he has a few spectacular games where he's doing like punt returns, kick returns, gets a pick, and like 100 yards receiving, which he's done before, and he could quite frankly do it again. He'll at least be a finalist, even if his stats aren't like Genty's right or like a quarterbacks or a guy in the SEC or something like that. So from my understanding, just kind of like how poorly Miami was doing just as a program in the previous 3 years to where they are right now. I know you don't like my guy, the head coach from Miami,
Mario Cristobal. Yeah.
You're not a fan of his. I am. I'm not surprised by their success, but I do think Cam Ward has a shot he'll definitely be a finalist so long as he doesn't get hurt.
Yeah, no, I like Cam Ward. He's my 3.
Okay.
So we had the same top 3, but just different order on the second, third. Cam Ward for me, I think he is that offense, right? You look at a guy, Heisman, whatever side of the ball he plays on for Travis Hunter is 2, is like that is the guy for you. And he's winning games, and his stats, obviously, they do match up with some of the past Heisman winners we've seen off that position. Thing about me is Miami, they should have lost to Cal, should have lost Virginia Tech. Refs bailed them out in both games. The rest of their schedule is pretty pitiful. They just have Clemson probably in the ACC champ. I don't know if that, I don't think a championship game will keep him out of there. I guess it's just like, can his hype, and you bring it up over Travis Hunter and Ashton Genty, is they have considerably more hype around them than a Cam Ward does, right?
I agree.
But I guess if they went out and then, hey, if they beat Clemson too, I mean, that'd be a crazy win for that program. But based on how they're playing right now and how they played last year and the year before, because Clemson's on an absolute tear right now. They look like the best team in the ACC.
Yep, I agree.
But we should revisit those. Artie. We'll keep you updated on our Heisman rankings, tracking who might win that. And we'll get back here at the end of the week for our second show. We'll have a special guest on to talk Georgia and Texas. We'll get our predictions in. We'll do our best to try to find out how this game might turn out. And, of course, hopefully for Georgia fans, that is in the Dawgs' favor. Just 3.5-point underdogs. I think Georgia eats this, man. They eat that, right? Underdogs? Come on. Nah, they're going to eat that, man. I thought Dan Jackson talking about it, Georgia safety, what a story for him. Former walk-on, didn't get any offers. Just say, hey, Kirby, can I play football here? He said, yeah, now he's a starter, right? And he says they're never the underdogs, right? That's what Dan Jackson said. I love that kid, man. He's awesome. But until next time, guys, thank you so much for watching and listening. Get in the comments if you want to be featured on the show. We're streaming on X, Facebook, and YouTube at the Pulse Sports Network each week. Until next time, we'll talk to you. Artie, have a good one, brother.
Go Dogs.